All right, everybody, this is Eric from Eric Tries Too Hard. We are going to try something new today, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to try this new type of podcast, some short podcasts that I've been dying to do for a while. We're going to call it TMI, too much information. I'm going to give out something I think is really cool, usually like a 4-minute comedy bit or song or section from a TV show or movie that I think deserves some real hardcore breaking down. And I think the best one to start with is one of my favorite bits in the history of comedy. It's a 4-minute bit called Tolu by the late, great Patrice O'Neal, my favorite comic. The quick history behind this bit. Actually, before I go into that, let me explain the concept of the podcast, or this format of the podcast. I would recommend, if you haven't heard whatever it is, so for in this case, you look it up. So for in this case, Patrice O'Neal, Tolu. Google that, YouTube it. That's what I'm doing. You can find it right away. Tolu, T-O-L-U, Patrice O'Neal, and you'll be able to find exactly what it is and take a listen to it if you want to hear it before this podcast. It's very short. You can just go for it. Otherwise, if you're not sold, listen to the podcast, and hopefully at some point during it, you'll be like, all right, I got to check this out. Go check it out. So what I'm going to do for all these is I'm going to play whatever it is, and I'm going to intro it, play it, and as it's going, I'm going to pause it and interject various things where I think it deserves interjecting to kind of break it down. So again, I think it's best if you listen to it ahead of time. Yeah, I'm telling you to navigate away from my website. Yes, because that's how stupid I am. So what I want you to do is take a listen and then come on back and check this out. But yeah, so let's go right into it. I'm going to hope the audio is okay. I've never done anything like this. So we'll see. So here's the quick background to get into Tolu from Patrice O'Neal. Patrice O'Neal is a stand-up comic. He died in his early 40s, and before he died, we were fortunate enough to get a lot of content out of him, like 144 O&A episodes, I believe, multiple stand-up specials, and the year he died, earlier that year, he put out an HBO special, Elephant in the Room, that was amazing, and that's what most people talk about when they talk about the greatest Patrice O'Neal gift that he gave us. But I would argue it's Mr. P, which is a stand-up special that was recorded at the DC Improv, and it came out shortly after his death, or a little bit after his death. And that actually, I followed his career from about, he died in, I think, 2010. I feel like an asshole for late 2010, I think. And I'm terrible with dates. Sorry. I don't know what my apologies to. Anyway, myself. So, yeah, he died then, but I'd followed his career from about, I guess, 2000, whenever he did his Comedy Central Presents special. That's when I first, or Colin Quinn's Tough Crowd, whichever one came first. That's where I heard of him, and I'd followed his career for a while, but it wasn't until I heard Mr. P where he became this comic that instantly entered my top 5. And Mr. P is what Tolu is off of. Now that I've gone back and heard all the O&A episodes, I realize this guy's the greatest comic that ever lived. People always talk about he never wrote anything down. Great quote from Bobby Kelly. He said that he was asked by a fan, you lived with Bill Burr and you lived with Patrice O'Neal. What was it like? Or I don't know if lived with, but it wasn't like being around those guys. And he said, well, Bill Burr made you feel bad because he worked so hard. He was always the hardest working guy. And Patrice O'Neal made you ask God, why didn't you touch me, God? Why didn't you give me the gift? Because Patrice O'Neal just had that gift. And the things Patrice always gets praised for, because after his death, he was recognized as such an amazing comic. He always gets praised for his brutal honesty and his ability to just cut. And by the way, he always envied Pryor, he said, because Pryor was able to explain how he felt better than Patrice could. Patrice could explain exactly how he felt. Audiences weren't fucking ready for it, and now that audiences have evolved, thanks to people like Louis C.K. and Bill Burr and Mark Maron, and maybe Kevin Brennan, we'll see how he's doing in a couple of years since his podcast is blown up. But people like that, with that brutal honesty, you can cut right to the core of what's actually going on, the things that we don't say, the real deep and dark. It's almost like a deep and dark observational humor, like a Seinfeld of this generation. Anyway, he always gets praised for that, and he always gets praised for he never wrote anything down. His crowd work was amazing. He could really do that. But here are 2 things that he doesn't really get praised for but I think you can find Tolu's a great example of when this happens. One, he is amazing. It was the main thing. He can talk to you or look at you for 30 seconds. And there are countless examples of this through stories people told or callers on O&A or crowd work he's done, where he barely talks to you and he knows your life story. He's like Dr. Drew, but with none of the training and none of the experience. But he really can just break, because so point being, that honesty he can cut through on himself, he can do that to other people. That's unbelievable, and I've never seen anything like it. I think, if I really think about it, that's probably why he's my favorite comic, because as a psychology professional by trade, and I love philosophy, it's just the fact that he could cut down to all that is just beautiful, and he does that with this guy. He basically tells the guy his own life story within a 4-minute bit, and the guy maybe says 3 things, and he tells him his life story, and you hear stories about this, about people saying Patrice could do that, but man, hearing it happen as it's happening is unbelievable. And by the way, Mr. P, that special, or whatever, that just show that turned into a special, was a friend of mine, Brad Hartland from the podcast. He contacted me shortly before that show, and he said, "Hey Eric, do you want to see Patrice O'Neal? I know you like him. You want to go down?" Because we had just seen Kevin Hart at the DC Improv like a minute before he exploded. We're the only white guys there. All his opening acts trashed the shit out of us for like an hour. They sat us right up front. I wondered why. And they're like, "Oh, I see why. We are the butt of all of the jokes tonight." Anyway, but he was like, "Yeah, you want to see the show?" And I said, and I quote, "We'll catch Patrice the next time." I'm tearing up as I say this because there would be no next time. Anyway, all right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show... Oh, and the other thing that Patrice could do was he could build, in this particular 4 minutes, it might as well be a closer that he worked on for years. If you know what a closer kind of feels like and sounds like for a lot of comics, he starts very small, he builds it up, has a huge crescendo, and then builds it back down and up again to a second huge crescendo. But as you can hear, he wasn't, this isn't a bit. This is crowd work that randomly happened. He was going into a bit about, I think the 2 tracks back to back, it was like, something like white women are pleasant, and then the next track is black women get you refunds. And so he's transitioning from the 2. And he's exiting like white women are present on the front, and if you mess up, they're like evil to you on the back end. And then he goes into black women will get you refunds, which is like they're rough on the front end, but they'll be like great to you if you have a long-lasting relationship. That's kind of what he's going, and he's in the middle, and all he needs to do is say, "My man, what's your name?" Get the guy's name and move on with the bit. That's all. He's just throwing the crowd in for a quick second, so it's still like a conversation. But the 4 minutes that ensue is basically, it's worthy of a closing bit. And the fact that he transitions out of a bit smoothly into this and into the next bit after what was essentially a closing bit is just phenomenal. So I'm going to play it and then pause it as I have things to say. Enjoy Patrice O'Neal, Tolu.
Like black women, there's this thing, like I don't know like how much people really know about, like, you see my man, what's your name, bro? Tolu. I'm trying to be all brotherly, but I'm like, nigga, Tolu. What you named after feet and a hula hoop, nigga? Like some goofy African name?
Instantly, he's got 3 or 4 jokes for it. He waits half a second and he's like, "I can't help myself." Oh my god.
My mother did that same stupid shit.
I don't even relate to him.
That's what Patrice is. Let me tell you something. You'd be watching, if it was up to one of my goofy ass 80-year-old aunts, I'd be Lumumba O'Neal up this motherfucker.
Now here he's relating and comparing to himself, bringing it back as a conversation, but he's not even addressing the person, he's addressing the crowd. It's like a whole nother bit. But also, the more I listen to this, the more I realize I think he's just buying time. Maybe he's still, while he's processing the root of it, I think, maybe. It's such an infectious laugh.
Your mom's went right through it. Tolu, white friends.
Calls him out for the people around his table.
They can't even fully have you as a friend. What the fuck? They gonna introduce you to other white people? This is Tolu, Tolu Roberts, nigga. What the fuck is
That's a perfect last name for him.
with you? What's your nickname, nigga? Don't say Lulu or Tutu.
You hear that pause and everyone's saying, "Aw, you don't." This is all an audio recording, which, by the way, I love comedy audio. I would rather listen to that than watch the video. But like, because she's like, "You're there." I pretend I put my headphones on, like I was in high school. Anyway, but yeah, like that implies the facial expression that he made. Now, a big thing towards the end of his career, he discovered sympathy in his act. Because it used to be like anger and honesty, but once he started going sympathy, where he'd like make fun of somebody or a group of people, and then it would be like, "I feel bad for you." That was a big turning point, and he's using it in this quick like crowd work bit.
I hate that name, and you got the voice that go with it too. Tolu.
You can do an impression of him immediately.
Voice ass Tolu. And you sitting with a Ralph and a Brian and a Jimmy. And this nigga's Tolu.
So fast.
The great warrior that works at a law firm. Tolu and Associates.
Tolu Associates? Are you sorry?
I fucking hate that name. I hate that name. Tolu, nigga. I hate that shit. Because it means something. And it's just goofy ass parents, man.
Again, with the sympathy and the deeper meaning at the same time, all instantaneous. So fucking.
I grew up with a woman's name. Nobody knows this shit is Patrice O'Neal, some African. That's a girl's name. Yeah. Patrice, you sure?
So here's the lull. He had the crescendo, and now it's kind of the lull, and he's gonna build it back up again to what also could be a closing bit.
Can I call you something else, nigga? Can I call you Brent or something? I don't want to call you Tolu, man. I don't. I'm fucking with you, man. You went through hell in school, huh? You had
Boom! Fucking starts telling his life story. All he knows about him is he's sitting with white people, and he's literally said, "Tolu," and everyone calls me Tolu. That's all the information he's had, and he's about to tell him his life story.
That's why you got white friends, right? Niggas done taught you a new asshole. Every day he come to school, niggas gonna go, boo, 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 boo. Like, niggas are funny. Here come Tolu. Here come Tolu. But your white friends go, "That's a very majestic name, my friend."
Of fucking course they did. It's so perfect. He knows, not only does he know him and his life story, he knows the culture of everything around it.
What is that name about? Well, it's from a king of
And he's being funny, telling improv jokes throughout every 2 seconds.
That's cool, man. Come on, hang out with us. No one's gonna tease me. It's not a setup. No, man. I love the word Tolu. Let me look it up for you, brother.
I have 1,000 white friends who sound. Let me look it up for you, brother. I can't. Oh my God, he knows. He knows us.
Oh, it means love and peace for the rest of your life, Tolu. Niggas just be, "Oh, you fucking give my Tolu." That's what my name go, Tolu.
And a big climax.
Tolu. We ain't shit though. Niggas ain't shit. We mean. We mean as shit. We mean. But that's why a lot of niggas date white women.
Perfect transition. Are you kidding me? Sorry, got a little excited. Okay, perfect transition to the end.
Yeah.
Into the next bit. Perfect transition. The man was a genius. It was amazing. Hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Patrice O'Neal with Tolu. Too much information. ETTH.com.